Outside, the storm screamed, turning the world into a frozen wasteland. Inside, a boy sat awake, listening. Something was out there. Then, in the dim glow of the fire, two glowing eyes appeared beyond the window. Silent, steady, unblinking. He wasn't alone anymore. The endless mountains of Alaska stretch far and wide, blanketed by thick layers of snow that seem to swallow every trace of life. The biting cold winds slashed through the barren trees, carrying the unforgiving breath of winter. In a small, isolated town, buried in ice, wooden houses stood scattered across the land, their dim golden lights flickering through tightly shut windows. Like fragile beacons, barely holding their own against the vast white wilderness. Liam, a 6-year-old boy, curled up on the couch, wrapping himself tightly in a thick blanket. The flames in the fireplace flickered, struggling to push back the bone-chilling cold, but it couldn't fill the emptiness in his heart. He was used to his mother leaving each night to work at the only clinic in town. She always reassured him that a neighbor would come to check on him, but tonight the snowfall was so heavy that every road was buried, making it impossible for anyone to leave their homes. Liam quietly gazed out the window. The sky was an inky black, without a single star in sight. Everything was swallowed by an endless white void, the swirling snowstorms rising in waves, making the outside world feel alien and terrifying. He pressed his forehead against the icy glass, his eyes shimmering with sadness. He missed his mother's voice, her warm embrace, the bedtime stories she used to tell him. Clutching his worn-out teddy bear tightly, he held on to the last bit of warmth he had left. Outside, the howling blizzard raged on, like wild beasts thrashing in fury. The winds slammed against the roof, whistling through the cracks in the wooden walls. Liam burrowed deeper into his blanket, trying to will himself to sleep. But then, a strange sound snapped him awake. Through the frost-covered glass, a large shadow emerged from the storm. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, a trick of the light reflecting against the snow, but it didn't fade. Instead, it grew clearer. A massive creature, its fur pure white against the blizzard's backdrop, was approaching the house. Liam held his breath. A dog? No, it was too big, its movements too graceful yet commanding. A white wolf. His heartbeat pounded in his chest as the animal stopped on the front porch. It didn't look like a predator stalking its prey. It simply stood there, its piercing eyes glowing in the darkness, staring at the door as if waiting for something. A shiver crawled up Liam's spine. He knew wolves were apex predators, yet he also knew they rarely approached humans, especially not in conditions like this. But the strangest thing of all was that it didn't leave. The wolf curled up right in front of the door, as if claiming the space as its own. It didn't howl, didn't growl, didn't shift its gaze from the cabin. Liam stared at the creature, the initial fear slowly melting into an inexplicable sense of curiosity. There was no threat in its eyes, no sign of hostility. Instead, something deep and unspoken lingered there, like a silent message he couldn't decipher. The coldness inside him seemed to ease slightly, as if someone, or something, was watching over him. Pulling the blanket tighter around himself, he cautiously backed away from the window, but he couldn't look away. Should he be afraid? Or should he trust this strange feeling stirring inside him? The blizzard continued to roar, but tonight, amidst the endless darkness, a white shadow lay still, silently keeping watch over him. The blizzard raged on, growing more violent with every passing moment. The furious winds slammed against the windows as if trying to tear through the fragile glass. Liam huddled deeper into the couch, his small hands gripping his teddy bear tightly, his wide eyes never straying from the white shadow outside the door. The wolf was still there, lying motionless, as if it were part of the night itself, a living statue made of breath and sharp, watchful eyes. His mother had told him that if anything happened, he should run to Mr. Martin's house, their neighbor just across the way, but tonight that was impossible. The snow had piled too high, and Liam couldn't see anything beyond the swirling white void. Harper had called earlier, giving him instructions before the phone lines were cut off by the storm. Mr. Martin had promised to check on him, but he never came. Liam scanned the small cabin, a place that had always felt warm and familiar, but now seemed eerily unfamiliar. The old wooden walls creaked under the pressure of the howling wind. The oil lamp on the table cast a weak glow, its flickering light stretching eerie shadows across the room. The fireplace still burned, embers glowing red-hot, but the cold still seeped through the cracks, creeping in like an uninvited ghost. He was used to his mother being away at night, but she had never been gone this long during such a terrible storm. He had always believed he was brave enough to stay home alone, but the truth was, he was still just a child. And right now, he was truly afraid. The howling wind outside drowned out every other sound, but suddenly, something cut through the noise, a sound that made Liam freeze. Not the storm, not the trees bending under the weight of ice. Footsteps. His breath caught in his throat. Someone was walking in the snow, right outside the house. Liam held his breath, his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the window, the white wolf still lay motionless, but its ears twitched, muscles tightening like a coiled spring. It had heard it too. The darkness outside seemed even deeper as a shadowy figure took form within the thick snowfall. At first, Liam thought his mind was playing tricks on him, but then he saw it clearly. A tall man, moving slowly toward the house. Each step sank deep into the snow, the sound muffled but heavy. The man wore a long coat, the hood pulled up, concealing most of his face. He stood before the cabin, unmoving, just watching. Liam didn't dare move. His pulse pounded in his ears, his fingers digging into the fabric of his blanket. Who was he? What did he want? He was no longer too young to understand danger. His mother had warned him about strangers who drifted through small towns, some searching for empty homes to rob, others with even worse intentions. Liam didn't want to think about what kind of man this was. The stranger shifted. He stepped onto the porch. A gloved hand reached for the doorknob. The door was locked, but that didn't make Liam feel any safer. Just as the man's hand began to turn the knob, a low, rumbling growl cut through the storm. The wolf sprang to life. It was no longer the silent guardian lying in wait. It was now a phantom of the storm, its fur bristling, eyes burning with a fierce glow. It stepped onto the porch, facing the intruder, teeth bared and gleaming in the dim light. The man stumbled back. The wolf didn't hesitate. It let out another growl, deeper this time, the sound vibrating through the frozen air. It was a warning. The stranger took another step back, then another. Then he turned and ran. Liam sat frozen, unable to move. Through the glass, he watched the shadowy figure disappear into the storm, swallowed by the relentless snow. The wolf remained standing, gaze fixed on the direction the man had fled. It didn't chase him, it simply stood there, standing guard. Liam wasn't sure how long he sat there, but at some point his body began to tremble from the cold. He pulled the blanket tighter around himself, but his eyes never left the wolf. It turned, looking straight at him through the window. Liam wasn't sure why, but at that moment he felt safe. The storm still raged on, but inside that small cabin, Liam was no longer alone. Liam pulled the blanket up to his chin, his eyes half-lidded, yet he couldn't look away from the wolf. The warmth from the fireplace kept him from freezing, but the silence outside unsettled him. The blizzard still howled, and branches battered against the windows as if they were trying to break in. Outside, the white figure remained motionless, like a stone in an ocean of snow. Liam found it strange. Why hadn't it left? A wild wolf should have sought shelter deep in the forest, away from people, away from the roads. Yet, it had chosen to stay, right in front of his house. He recalled the stories his mother used to tell him, tales of wild but loyal wolves, how they protected their packs, how they only attacked when they felt threatened. He never thought he would see a wolf in real life, let alone witness one behaving like this, standing guard outside a stranger's house, as if it had been assigned a duty. Outside, the wolf stirred slightly. It lifted its head, ears perked up as if listening for something. Liam's chest tightened. He couldn't hear anything beyond the shrieking wind, but the wolf looked tense. The fur on its back bristled slightly, its breath forming thin wisps of mist in the freezing air. He swallowed hard, gripping the blanket. A thought flashed through his mind. Was it hearing something? He strained his ears, but all he could pick up was the sound of the storm whipping through the house. Yet the wolf's gaze never left the darkness ahead, its amber eyes glowing, locked onto something Liam could not see. Liam unconsciously took a step back, his heartbeat quickening. If even a wild predator was on edge, then something was definitely wrong. A faint sound broke through the wind. This time, he heard it. It wasn't the storm. It wasn't the snow sliding off the roof. It was something else, a soft crunching sound, as if something was moving through the thick snow. Liam froze. He turned his head toward the wolf and saw that it had already risen. It was no longer curled up on the porch. Its entire body was taut, front legs lowered, prepared to pounce. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its throat. Not too loud, but enough to send a chill down Liam's spine. He held his breath. Outside the window, beyond the swirling snow, a shadow flickered. Liam stumbled backward, his pulse pounding in his ears. Someone was out there. It couldn't be his mother. It couldn't be the neighbors. No one could be outside in a storm like this. Who was it? And what did they want? The wolf took a step forward, its growl deepening. It was no longer the calm, silent guardian. Now it was a hunter, prepared for a fight. A handprint pressed against the window. Liam screamed. The door shuddered violently as something pounded against it. His breath lodged in his throat. Whoever it was wasn't just passing by, they were trying to get inside. The banging on the door grew more frantic. The wolf let out a piercing howl, sharp and urgent, cutting through the storm like a siren in the dead of night. The shadow outside flinched. A second later, a hoarse voice rasped through the wooden door. "Who's in there?" Liam didn't answer. He trembled, retreating into the corner of the room, clutching his teddy bear as if it could shield him. The stranger kept pounding on the door. Every instinct inside Liam screamed not to make a sound, not to move. Did the man know he was here? Or was he just looking for shelter? The wolf didn't seem to care. It stepped closer to the door, its gaze cold, unblinking. A sharp metallic click echoed in the air. Liam's blood ran cold. He was picking the lock. Before Liam could cry out, a ferocious snarl erupted from right outside the door. The wolf lunged. Its entire body slammed into the door, sending a spray of snow cascading from the roof. Outside, a scream tore through the night. The shadow outside stumbled backward, staggering. Then, frantic footsteps crunched through the snow, growing fainter and fainter. Liam trembled, peeking through the frosted window. The man was gone. The wolf stood firm, growling one last time as if issuing a final warning. Then, it turned and looked into the house. Liam wasn't sure why, but at that moment, he felt safer than he ever had before. Liam couldn't take his eyes off the white wolf. It still stood there, a massive figure, unmoving like a sculpture carved into the night. Snow clung to its thick fur, but its amber eyes burned bright, fixed on the darkness where the stranger had vanished. He took a step back, his hands trembling as he clutched the blanket tighter. The wolf had chased the man away, but would he come back? And if he did, what could Liam do besides hide behind this locked door? A draft of freezing air slipped through a small gap in the window, making the fire flicker. Liam squeezed his teddy bear against his chest. Should he do something? Should he try calling for help? But no one could get through the storm, and his mother was still gone. A sound broke through the wind. This time, it wasn't from the front door. Liam froze. The floorboards creaked. From the back of the house, someone was moving. His eyes widened as a terrifying realization sank in. The intruder hadn't left. He hadn't run away. He was looking for another way inside. Panic surged through Liam's chest. He slid off the couch, trying to move as quietly as possible. He crept toward the kitchen window, pressing himself against the wall, his heart pounding so hard he feared it might echo outside. Slowly, carefully, he peered through the glass. Amid the swirling snow, a dark figure moved behind the house. The man was searching for a way in. Liam bit down on his lip to keep from making a sound. This wasn't a lost traveler. This wasn't a desperate man looking for shelter. If that were the case, he would have knocked. He would have called out. But he didn't. He was sneaking. Liam inched away from the window, trying not to make a noise. But his foot knocked over a wooden stool. Clack. He held his breath. The shadow outside stopped moving. Liam couldn't see the man's face, but he felt his eyes lock onto the window. Then, without warning, the man lunged. Liam screamed, stumbling backward, his heart slamming against his ribs. A heavy thud shook the back door. Boom! Liam curled into a ball in the corner, hands pressed over his ears. Boom! The door rattled violently. Boom! 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 The blows came harder, as if the man was trying to break the door due. From outside the front, the white wolf jerked its head up, its ears shot forward, muscles tensing like a coiled spring. It only needed 1 second to understand the new threat. Without hesitation, it bolted. Liam heard the powerful thumps of paws against snow. Then, a ferocious snarl erupted from outside. Inside, Liam held his breath. The pounding stopped. 1 second of silence. Then, a chilling hiss sliced through the storm. A howl, long and unrelenting, rose above the wind. Not just the cry of a wolf, the call of a predator. Liam crawled to the window, peering out. The white wolf was already there. Through the dim glow of the fire inside, Liam saw it charge toward the back of the house. The man let out a startled yelp, stumbling backward. The wolf didn't give him a chance to run. It roared, teeth flashing in the dark, lunging forward. The man screamed, falling onto the thick snow. He scrambled back, struggling to stand, but the wolf pressed closer, its growl a warning, a challenge. Something inside Liam shifted. The fear was still there, but now it wasn't for himself. He wasn't afraid of the wolf. He was in awe of it. The wolf was protecting him. The man had no way in. He couldn't reach Liam. Not as long as the wolf was here. The man hesitated, then turned and ran. He stumbled through the snow, tripping once, before disappearing into the raging blizzard. The wolf didn't chase after him. It stood still, breathing heavily, watching the man vanish into the storm. For a moment, Liam felt like time had stopped. Only the howling wind remained. Then, for the first time, the wolf turned its gaze directly toward Liam. Liam wasn't afraid. He couldn't explain why, but in that moment, he knew. This wolf wasn't just a wild animal. It was his guardian. It had been waiting on his porch all night. It had attacked when he was in danger, and now it was still there, watching, protecting. Liam took a step closer to the window, pressing his palm lightly against the glass. The wolf didn't move, its amber eyes glowing in the snowy night. Neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. A gust of wind swept through, lifting the snow into a swirling veil. And when it settled, the wolf had turned away. It walked slowly into the forest, but not far. It lay down just beyond the porch, no longer bristling with rage, but with an eerie calmness. Liam didn't know if it would stay until morning. But he knew one thing: it wouldn't leave, as long as he still needed it. The blizzard still howled outside, but inside the small wooden cabin, Liam felt safer than ever. His heartbeat was still pounding from what had happened, but he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer alone. The white wolf was still there, lying in front of the porch like a living barrier between him and the dangers of the night. The fire in the hearth flickered and danced, casting a warm glow across the room. Yet, Liam couldn't take his eyes off the window. He curled up on the sofa, pulling the blanket tightly around himself. But sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. Everything had happened so fast, so unexpectedly. His breath fogged up the cold glass as he leaned in closer. The wolf remained still, its thick fur now coated in a fresh layer of snow. It hadn't left. Its amber eyes no longer burned with the fury it had shown the intruder. Instead, they were calm, almost watchful. This was no ordinary wild animal. It was his guardian. Liam pulled the blanket tighter around himself, but he no longer felt afraid. He felt at peace. His small fingers fumbled for the worn-out teddy bear, the last gift his father had given him before he passed away. Whenever Liam was scared or lonely, he hugged it tightly, as if it carried a part of his father's presence. He thought of the stories his mother used to tell him about his dad, a skilled hunter, but never one who killed for sport. His father had only ever hunted for survival, always showing deep respect for nature. Liam suddenly remembered something, one of his mother's stories. She had once told him that his father had encountered a white wolf deep in the forest during a hunting trip. He hadn't shot it. He had simply stood there, watching it, as it had watched him. Then, without a sound, the wolf had turned and disappeared into the woods. Liam blinked. Could it be? A strong gust of wind rattled the windows, making Liam jump. He turned sharply toward the front door. Had he locked it properly? Slowly, cautiously, Liam got up and tiptoed toward the entrance. The door was still shut, the lock still in place, but something didn't feel right. He pressed his ear against the wooden surface, listening intently. Nothing, just the wind. But then, footsteps. Liam's breath caught in his throat, not the wolf's. His head snapped up, eyes widening in alarm. Someone was still out there. He moved toward the side window, peeking through the narrow opening. The night was dark, but against the snowy backdrop, he could make out a faint shape moving. The man. He had come back. Liam took a step backward, his small hands clutching the hem of his pajamas. He couldn't let him in. But what could he do? He bit his lip, his mind racing. The phone. But then he remembered. His mother had taken it to get repaired that morning. There was no way to call for help. His eyes darted to the fireplace, the iron poker. It wasn't much, but maybe he could use it to defend himself. Before he could move, a deep, rumbling growl echoed outside. Liam froze. The wolf. He ran to the window and peered out. The enormous white figure had risen from its resting place, its muscles coiled, its stance rigid. It wasn't relaxed anymore. It was ready. Its fur bristled, amber eyes sharp as daggers fixed on the darkness beyond. A flicker of light caught Liam's eye, a flashlight. The intruder really had come back, but this time he wasn't getting any closer. The white wolf was blocking his path. Liam held his breath as the dark figure hesitated. The man took a slow step backward, then another. The wolf didn't move. It didn't growl. It didn't It simply stood there, unmoving, unyielding. The tension between them stretched, thin as ice, ready to shatter. Then, finally, the man turned and ran. Liam watched his shadow retreat, his footsteps heavy against the deep snow until they disappeared into the night. The wolf never looked away. A wave of relief crashed over Liam, his legs almost giving out. He stepped away from the window, his heart slowly returning to its normal rhythm. He didn't know who this wolf was or why it was here, but he knew one thing for certain. It had saved him. Liam made his way back to the couch, pulling the blanket around him once more. But this time, he didn't feel alone. Outside, the wolf quietly returned to its spot in front of the cabin. It lay down once more, its gaze fixed on the darkened tree line. It was still watching, still protecting. The blizzard raged on outside, but inside the cabin, Liam had never felt warm. His body sagged into the cushions, his eyelids growing heavier. For the first time that night, he felt safe enough to sleep. And just as he drifted off, a low, haunting howl rose into the storm. It wasn't the sound of loneliness. It was the sound of a guardian standing watch, keeping a child safe in the cold, unforgiving night. Someone was still out there. He moved toward the side window, peeking through the narrow opening. The night was dark, but against the snowy backdrop, he could make out a faint shape moving. The man, he had come back. Liam took a step backward, his small hands clutching the hem of his pajamas. He couldn't let him in. But what could he do? He bit his lip, his mind racing. The phone. But then he remembered. His mother had taken it to get repaired that morning. There was no way to call for help. His eyes darted to the fireplace, the iron poker. It wasn't much, but maybe he could use it to defend himself. Before he could move, a deep, rumbling growl echoed outside. Liam froze. The wolf. He ran to the window and peered out. The enormous white figure had risen from its resting place, its muscles coiled, its stance rigid. It wasn't relaxed anymore. It was ready. Its fur bristled, amber eyes sharp as daggers, fixed on the darkness beyond. A flicker of light caught Liam's eye, a flashlight. The intruder really had come back, but this time he wasn't getting any closer. The white wolf was blocking his path. Liam held his breath as the dark figure hesitated. The man took a slow step backward, then another. The wolf didn't move. It didn't growl. It didn't charge. It simply stood there, unmoving, unyielding. The tension between them stretched, thin as ice, ready to shatter. Then, finally, the man turned and ran. Liam watched his shadow retreat, his footsteps heavy against the deep snow, until they disappeared into the night. The wolf never looked away. A wave of relief crashed over Liam, his legs almost giving out. He stepped away from the window, his heart slowly returning to its normal rhythm. He didn't know who this wolf was or why it was here, but he knew one thing for certain. It had saved him. Liam made his way back to the couch, pulling the blanket around him once more. But this time, he didn't feel alone. Outside, the wolf quietly returned to its spot in front of the cabin. It lay down once more, its gaze fixed on the darkened tree line. It was still watching, still protecting. The blizzard raged on outside, but inside, the cabin, Liam had never felt warmer. His body sagged into the cushions, his eyelids growing heavier. For the first time that night, he felt safe enough to sleep. And just as he drifted off, a low, haunting howl rose into the storm. It wasn't the sound of loneliness. It was the sound of a guardian standing watch, keeping a child safe in the cold, unforgiving night. Jacob exhaled, his breath coming out in puffs of white in the cold air. Last night, a man was spotted lurking around town. He tried breaking into Mrs. Lucy's house, but she caught him and he ran. This morning, the sheriff found a torn jacket near the edge of the forest, and a trail of wolf tracks everywhere. Harper stiffened. Liam told me a white wolf chased someone away last night. Jacob's eyes widened. A white wolf? Liam, now standing beside his mother, spoke up softly. It was big, but it didn't hurt me. It just stayed to protect me. Jacob fell silent, his weathered face creasing with deep thought. Slowly he lowered himself onto the porch steps, staring toward the distant tree line. If it was really that big, then maybe it was the white shadow. Harper frowned. The what? Jacob rubbed his hands together, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The white shadow. An old legend. Harper folded her arms. I don't believe in ghost stories, Jacob. Jacob let out a dry chuckle. Neither did I, until today. He shifted his gaze to Liam. Michael, the old hunter in town, once told me a story about a legendary white wolf. Years ago, a man got lost in a terrible blizzard. He had a wolf with him, his companion, but before rescuers could find him, the man froze to death. They say the wolf stayed by his master's side, guarding him for days, until it too vanished into the snow. Jacob let out a slow breath. Ever since then, people have claimed that whenever a child is lost in a storm, a white shadow appears to protect them. A chill ran down Harper's spine. She instinctively pulled Liam closer. But why would it help Liam? Jacob shrugged. Who knows? Maybe it still has a duty left unfinished. Maybe it sensed he needed protection. Harper looked down at Liam, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite put into words. Her son, just 6 years old, had survived a terrifying night, and a wild animal had protected him like a guardian standing watch over its charge. Liam squeezed her hand. He wasn't afraid anymore, because he knew deep down one undeniable truth. That wolf wasn't just any ordinary animal. It was a protector. And somewhere, out in the vast Alaskan wilderness, it was still watching over him. News of the white shadow in the blizzard spread like wildfire throughout the small town. Neighbors whispered about the strange story Liam had told, and the tracks imprinted in the snow stood as undeniable proof. A wolf had been there all night. It hadn't attacked, nor had it run away. Instead, it had stood guard, like a silent sentinel, protecting the home of a 6-year-old boy. At the little cafe in the heart of town, where locals gathered every morning, the story became the main topic of discussion. Never heard of a wolf acting like that, muttered Helen, the cafe owner, shaking her head as she refilled Jacob's coffee cup. If it was just any wild animal, it would have attacked or disappeared by now. The white shadow in the blizzard. Michael, the town's oldest hunter, repeated the name locals occasionally whispered. His weathered face was thoughtful, as if lost in distant memories. Harper, sitting across from them, gripped her coffee cup tightly. She had heard the story from Jacob, but part of her still couldn't fully believe it. Michael, can you tell me more about this legend? She asked in a quiet voice. The old hunter set his cup down, his wrinkled hands folding together as he exhaled. When I was a boy, my father told me about a hunter who lost his life in a terrible snowstorm more than 50 years ago. He had a white wolf by his side, his loyal companion, never straying even for a moment. But when the blizzard buried the man under layers of ice and snow, the wolf did not leave. It sat there, guarding its master's body for days, even though it knew it would not survive. Michael paused, his gaze drifting to the frosted window, where the morning light cast long shadows over the snow-covered ground. Years later, people began talking about a white wolf appearing during snowstorms. It didn't hunt. It didn't attack people. Instead, it always seemed to be near lost children or those in danger. Some say it's the spirit of that wolf, still wandering the land because it has unfinished business. A shiver ran down Harper's spine. She wasn't one to believe in folklore, but something about this story unsettled her. She glanced at Liam, who was sitting beside her, listening with wide, curious eyes. Maybe the wolf really did come to protect you, Michael said, looking directly at Liam. Maybe it knew you needed help. Liam nodded slowly, completely unafraid. I think so too. It didn't scare me, it just watched over me. Harper rested a hand on her son's shoulder. But if it was just a wild animal, will it come back? Jacob shook his head. No one knows. But if it truly is the white shadow in the blizzard, then maybe it only appears when it's needed. The townspeople continued to murmur among themselves. Some believed the story, others dismissed it as mere coincidence. But regardless of their beliefs, one fact remained. No ordinary wolf had ever acted that way before. A few days later, Harper took Liam outside to the front yard. The thick snow still held faint traces of the wolf's massive paw prints, though they were beginning to fade under the sun's gentle warmth. Liam crouched down, placing his small hand over one of the prints, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think it will come back, Mom?" Harper hesitated, watching her son. She didn't know how to answer. "If it does, what will you do?" Liam lifted his head, his clear blue eyes filled with quiet determination. "I'll thank it. For protecting me." A warmth spread through Harper's chest. She didn't know if there was truly a spirit wolf wandering the blizzards, or if the white wolf that had saved Liam was simply an unusual animal. But she did know one thing. Some mysteries could not be explained by science. Some connections could not be seen but only felt. She squeezed Liam's hand. "If it comes back, I think it would be happy to hear that." Far away, deep in the snow-covered forest, a silent figure stood atop a hill, its white fur blending seamlessly with the frozen landscape. Its amber eyes watched over the mother and child from a distance. It did not leave. It did not disappear. It was simply waiting. As spring approached, the snow began to melt, yet the forests of Alaska retained their icy stillness. The once frozen roads became more navigable, and life in the small town gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Harper continued her shifts at the clinic, while Liam resumed the carefree days of a 6-year-old child. But one thing had changed. He no longer feared the blizzards. Each night, before going to bed, he would peer out the window, his gaze drifting toward the distant woods, as if searching for something. He never mentioned it to his mother, but deep inside, he longed to see that white shadow again, the wolf that had stayed by his side on that bitterly cold night. He didn't know where it was, or if it would ever return, but somehow he felt it was still nearby, silently watching over him. One late afternoon, Harper and Liam were driving home after a trip to town for groceries. The road they traveled wound through a dense forest where towering fir trees still carried remnants of snow on their branches. The sun had begun to dip behind the distant mountains, casting a golden glow across the sky. Liam rested his head against the car window, eyes scanning the landscape. Sensing something he couldn't quite explain, then he saw it. Perched atop a rocky ledge, standing among the bare, twisted branches, was a white figure. Liam gasped. "Mom, look!" Harper instinctively pressed the brakes, following her son's pointing finger, and there on the ridge stood a massive white wolf, its fur shimmering under the soft hues of the setting sun. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring straight at them. "Oh my God," Harper whispered, her heart pounding. Liam couldn't tear his eyes away. Without hesitation, he unbuckled his seatbelt and pushed open the car door. "Liam?" Harper called after him, but he stepped forward, mesmerized. He wasn't afraid. His heart raced. But not from fear. From something else. Something deeper. Standing in front of the car, Liam gazed up at the wolf. The wind rustled through the trees, making the branches sway, yet the wolf remained motionless. Its amber eyes gleamed in the fading light. "Mom," Liam whispered, "I think it remembers me." Harper stood behind her son, uncertain of what to say. She could feel it. Something unexplainable. Something beyond logic. A connection neither of them could see, yet neither could deny. And the wolf lingered for a few more moments, as if contemplating something. Liam slowly raised his hand, though he knew it was too far away to touch. "Thank you," he said softly. The white shadow tilted its head slightly, ears twitching as if it had heard him. A gust of wind swept through the trees, stirring the snow into the air, and just like that the wolf turned, its movements fluid and graceful, stepping off the ridge and disappearing into the depths of the forest. Harper exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. She looked down at Liam, who was smiling, a radiant, knowing smile. "It came back to say goodbye," Liam said, his voice filled with certainty. Harper knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around her son. She didn't know if the wolf had been an ordinary animal or something more, but she knew one thing for sure: it had protected her child. The two of them remained there for a long while, gazing into the forest, where the white shadow had vanished. A strange peace settled over Harper, one she couldn't quite explain. Finally, she took Liam's hand and led him back to the car. As they drove home, Liam continued to look out the window, but this time, he wasn't searching. He was remembering. The white shadow was gone, but it was still there, somewhere deep in the vast forests, in the whispering winds that swept through the snow, in the old legends of the town, and in the heart of a little boy who had once been protected on the coldest night of his life. Time passed, one winter after another, and Liam grew up. He was no longer the 6-year-old boy clutching a stuffed bear on a stormy night. He had become a strong, intelligent young man with a burning passion for nature. The memories of the white wolf never faded. As he matured, Liam realized that that night had changed his life in ways no one could have predicted. It wasn't just a random encounter between a boy and a wild beast. It was a reminder of the deep connection between humans and the natural world, an invisible thread stronger than anything else. From a young age, Liam spent hours reading about wildlife, especially wolves. He learned about how they survived, how they communicated, and how they were misunderstood and hunted by humans. As he grew older, he joined wildlife conservation camps, following researchers into the Arctic wilderness to study its fragile ecosystem. The summer after graduating high school, Liam received a scholarship to a prestigious university specializing in zoology. Harper cried when she saw her son open the acceptance letter. She knew, from that moment on, he no longer belonged to their small town. Liam's heart belonged to the wild, to the forests, the snow-covered trails, and the untamed lands beyond civilization. At university, Liam dedicated himself to his studies and research. He embarked on weeks-long field expeditions, tracking wolf prints through the snow, listening to their haunting howls under the icy moonlight. He wrote a thesis on the vital role wolves play in maintaining the balance of the ecosystem and how their presence kept nature in harmony. But Liam wasn't just a researcher, he was a protector. He understood that wolves and humans could coexist, but only if people learned to respect nature instead of trying to control it. He spent years working with conservation organizations, advocating against reckless hunting and educating communities about the importance of wolves in the wild. He didn't want the white wolves, like the one from his past, to disappear because of human ignorance and fear. After earning his master's degree, Liam made a decision: he would return to Alaska. He wanted to create a sanctuary where humans and wildlife could coexist without harm. With the support of conservation groups, he founded Northern Guardian, a vast protected area dedicated to Arctic wolves. As the sanctuary took shape, the wolves began to return, sensing the safety they had long lost. Research teams from around the world came to study the project, eager to understand Liam's vision. His name became known in the wildlife conservation community, a man who dedicated his life to protecting creatures others deemed as dangerous predators. One day, while tracking a pack of wolves moving through the reserve, Liam stopped on a high ridge, where he could see the vast forest stretching before him. Standing in the middle of that untamed landscape, he thought back to the blizzard from his childhood, to the golden eyes that had watched over him. Liam wondered, was the white wolf still alive? Had it grown old with time? Had it left behind a legacy in these woods? He took a deep breath, feeling the crisp northern wind against his skin. He didn't need to see it again to know that it was there, in the wind, in the footprints in the snow, in every wolf he protected. That wolf had saved him once, and now he had dedicated his life to repaying that debt. This winter was colder than the years before. The snow lay thicker, and the wind howled through the bare trees, whipping the snowflakes into swirling patterns in the air. Liam returned to his small hometown, where everything had changed, yet still carried the familiar breath of the past. The quiet streets, the rooftops blanketed in snow, and the small wooden house where he had grown up, still standing, a silent witness to time. Harper had grown older, but her warm smile remained the same. She wrapped her frail arms around her son, her eyes shimmering with pride. "You've done extraordinary things, Liam," she whispered. "Your father would be so proud." Liam smiled, but his heart ached slightly. His father had been gone for a long time, yet there was something else he always wondered about. The white wolf, from that fateful night, was it still alive? And if it was, did it still remember him? The next morning, before the sun had risen, Liam left the house. His footprints pressed into the untouched snow, leading him toward the forest where he had once seen that ghostly figure in the middle of a raging blizzard. His breath turned to mist in the freezing air as he stood still, watching the towering, lifeless trees. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, or if he was waiting at all. And then he saw it. Not the wolf itself, but its tracks, fresh paw prints pressed deep into the pristine snow, clear and unmistakable. Liam's heart clenched as a wave of emotion surged through him. He stepped closer, crouching down, and gently brushed his fingers over the tracks. It felt like touching a distant memory. He lifted his gaze toward the dense forest ahead, where the shadows of the trees stretched long under the first light of dawn. There was no sign of the white wolf, yet somehow he knew it was still out there. Maybe it was old, maybe it had traveled far. Maybe these tracks belonged to another wolf entirely. But no matter the truth, Liam felt its presence. He took a deep breath and whispered, his words carried away by the cold morning breeze. "Thank you for protecting me. I still remember." From somewhere in the distance, a long, haunting howl echoed through the trees, carried by the crisp winter air. It could have been the wind. It could have been another wolf. Or perhaps it was a silent guardian's response, a voice from the past reaching out one last time. Liam stood there for a long while, listening, letting the sound sink deep into his heart. Then, with a final glance at the forest, he turned and walked away. But this time, he carried no uncertainty with him. He knew that no matter where he went, no matter how much the world changed, there would always be white shadows in the snowstorms, spirits of the wild, silent protectors, and bonds that transcended the divide between humans and nature. And with every gust of winter wind rustling through the barren trees, with each passing season, the story would live on. The story of the child in the blizzard and the white wolf that saved him.